welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry, or who were used to be in the industry. I'm Rebecca Caligeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, I get to welcome back one of my very favorite guests and one of the truly nicest people you will ever meet, Kirsten Butzow. She spent 30 years teaching and leading product management teams in some of the biggest names in tech. I had the pleasure of working with her twice while in different stints at Pragmatic. And I've just seen just the great impact that she has on all of the people that she's worked with and for. And she and I were chatting and we were talking about, she was kind of reflecting. She just recently retired, effectively, not one of those who retires and then takes a job another in like a week. But she was reflecting on sort of her overall career and what she learned both as she developed and as she helped teams develop. And I think she's just got a really interesting perspective on sort of that career management and flow that is really helpful no matter where you are in your particular life cycle. So with all of that being said, welcome, Kirsten.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. That was more than is probably deserved, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And as always, I'm very excited to be here because I just like to hang out and talk about stuff. So I think that's what we should probably do.
Awesome. All right. So usually we do origin stories, but we've heard your origin story. So I want to ask you, like, why do you think that product management is like the best job in the whole wide world?
I mean, first of all, I think it's self-evident and should be obvious why it's the best job in the whole wide world. But if it's not self-evident and you're looking for actual artifacts to back that statement up, I would say the reason I always loved it is because it is one of the most unique roles you can play in an organization, and that you are truly a general manager or you're truly the CEO of the product that you lead. If done correctly, you actually get to have your fingerprints on everything from market sensing activities to build activities to launch activities to ongoing support and market discovery activities. And so it's one of the only jobs, if not the only job I can think of in the company, where you get to touch everything. Sales, marketing, development, implementation services, customer success, tech support. And so you have to have a point of view on all of the componentry required to succeed when leading your product. And if you have an overactive monkey brain that's constantly wanting to jump around to different things, it's a great profession for you to seek.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing, and I think I know this is something, it's just like, if you're just like a really curious person, I remember the first time I met Kirsten, she was explaining about this documentary she'd seen about M&Ms. And it's just like, it's that kind of like, if you're curious and you're always interested in the backstory of everything and you want to know and poke and see how things work, like this is the gig for you. So
100%.
For sure.
100%.
All right, Kirsten. So like, I should drop some knowledge on us, but like, give us kind of the, as you've reflected on the career and as you've kind of coached and helped others, you kind of talk about 3 different phases. So like set up that whole construct for us.
So it's, you don't know what to expect when you retire, and you don't know, you have things that you anticipate people are going to say to you or ask you or whatever. And one of the number one questions I have been asked is career advice. How do you cultivate and curate a career over the course of a career, not just at any given moment in time? And because it's come up so frequently, we thought it might be a fun idea to talk about. And so I thought about, well, how to break that conversation down? When somebody asks me that question, do I have a thoughtful answer, other than, well, you just should get up and go to work every day and it'll be awesome. So I just felt like I probably should get a little crisper because I was being asked so often. And what I really thought about is this. When you think about your career, really, truly, you can chunk it into 3 distinct phases or 3 distinct segments. And each one of those phases lasts about 10 to 12 years. And so you've got your first phase, your second phase, your third phase. And at the end of those 3 phases, you're going to work your 35, 36, hopefully maybe closer to the 30-year mark. That's why I did the 10 to 12 years, maybe if you want to get out early. And there are different things that happen, just like life. There are different things that happen, different knowledge that you want to acquire over the course of that 10 to 12 year, 3 phases of time. And so I thought, okay, well, but what would you call those phases? How would you refer to those phases? And so what I'm really doing is I'm calling them 3 distinct names. I'm calling them do, I'm calling them build, and I'm calling them catalyst. And there's very specific things that happen in each one of those chunks of time, in each one of those phases that you should sort of be thinking about as you move through or advance through your career. Do you want to break down each one of those, or is that
I do. I do. So let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. Let's start with do or do in this case.
Do. Okay. So the do phase. This is your first 10 to 12 years of your career. And in the do phase, what you're really thinking about is knowledge acquisition. You're learning things, you're gaining experiences, you're obtaining credentials, you're honing your skills, you're starting to sort of target in on an industry that's interesting to you, product solution sets that maybe you're interested in working in, you're networking, and you're really just sort of this giant sponge trying to take everything you can in. I think about it like packing a bag for a trip. And so you're really thinking about how am I packing that suitcase and where am I going in my initial phase of my career with the suitcase? And this is really the phase of your career where you demonstrate your excellence through your ability to actually do the work, get the work done, and demonstrate yourself as having some level of expertise in the work that you're doing. As you think about doing that, I think one of the most critical things you can do in the do phase is kind of get honed in on an industry that is interesting to you, where you think you want to spend your career. And you might move industries around to try that out. But as you start to exit your do phase and you start to enter your build phase, that's going to be a really, really important component of the build phase. And we'll talk about that when we get to build, but I'll pause here.
So when you think about targeting industry, is it always industry? Could it be like, I like startups versus large organizations? Like, is it really industry specific, or is it area of specialty that we could define different ways?
Well, that is an excellent question. And I would say yes, no, and maybe. And
excellent.
So let's talk about
Super
that.
clear.
Right. All right. So you make a really great point. One I hadn't thought about, which is, let's talk about the industry first. And I'm going to sneak peek into build, why I'm sort of harping on that in this first phase of your career journey. There will be a point in time where you might want to change industries towards the end of your build phase. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And if you have 20 years of experience and you want to in a industry, in a subject matter expertise area, and you want to switch, it's really, really, really hard to do because you're always going to be going up against somebody who has the same 20 years, but in that subject matter expertise area. So I think maybe industry is too strong of a word, genre, area, something of interest.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you love music and music is your thing, maybe going to work for a company like Spotify is where you should sort of target your interest. It's probably not going to work for State Farm Insurance. Maybe you could get that job and maybe you could be great at it and maybe you could excel at it, but it's not going to be what you really continue to be passionate about as you move through those longer tail ends of your career. I think you also make a really excellent point about size of the organization. I think it's actually a very sage idea to think about what is your personal sweet spot for where you want to be. Some people are startup wonks. They love the startup. They're starters. They get it to a point and then they got to jump to their next thing and their next thing and their next thing. Some people don't have the I'm trying to think of the right word, but it's, it takes a certain strength of will
It sure
and
does.
not full of
Yes.
faint of heart to do a startup. Some people just don't have that constitution. You've got the really giant organizations, huge multinational Fortune 500. And what's really great about organizations like that is you have lots of resources typically at your fingertips, but your career path might be a little slower through an organization of that size. They may not be as nimble. There may not be as much upward trajectory in a quick way. You've got sort of that middle of the road organization as well. That's kind of sort of been my sweet spot where you feel like you have enough resources to get the work done that you want to get done, but you're still allowed to be innovative, nimble, agile, flexible, quick, to have permission to try things without having to go through a lot of, administrative bureaucracy to get approval for every little thing. All of those are great. They're wonderful and they're perfect for someone. And so what I think is important to think about too is what's perfect for you may not be perfect for somebody else. So yeah, I would agree. I would say genre, industry, size and type of organization. Spend your first 10 to 12 years really thinking about honing in on that because you're going to need that foundation when we talk about that next phase.
And I think it's a good time to explore these different things. You may not know, are you a big company or a little company kind of person until you try it. That first thing, look, we all move a lot in the beginning. It is a good time to experience those different things so that you know and can kind of triangulate on it. Because on the other side, as a hiring manager, all of those things matter. In the beginning, like I want the core skills, but then I do want someone who's used to the size and used to the level of resources and used to kind of the stage of the organization, and then just the industry insights and connections. So the more you can kind of test different things to triangulate, I think, in the do stage is a really smart idea. And
you're packing the bag. For everyone, you're packing the bag, right? What do you want? And how you pack your bag 10 years into being a business traveler is distinctly different than how you pack it at year one, but you've got to learn that process.
And also, it's not always obvious, right? So it sounds like who wouldn't rather work at Spotify than who would work at insurance? Like it sounds a thing, but also when you get into, I spent the early part of my career in financial services, and it's really interesting. Like if you ask me on paper the things I am hobby, I wouldn't be like, what I really like is unbanked. Let's talk about that. But you can find that passion in surprising places. So another good way to test, which you can test through lots of different ways. But okay.
Well, Rebecca, I know we're going to belabor this and we need to move on, but you just said something that really caught my attention that is highly aligned to a skill set for being a great product manager. And that is the ability to perpetually be sensing the market. Maybe a great way to think about it isn't as much as industry or genre or something like that, but think about it through the lens of who is the customer being served.
Oh, I love that.
And is that customer interesting to you?
Oh, I love
that. Right? Because, you might think, well, I like music, so Spotify is for me, but I don't really love, that my customer happens to be, well, I'm a Spotify customer, so I'll use myself, a middle-aged woman who's listening to stuff on her treadmill. And that customer is not interesting to me. Right. So not that I'm sure that I'm wildly interesting, but in that scenario,
that's why you're on the podcast.
I might not actually be an interesting customer for you to want to work to build solutions for. So no offense taken if I'm not your cup of tea.
I actually love that pivot because, yes, I like music, or do I like the art of making it, the musician, and the power, and it's the knowledge of the buyer that I could move from space to space. That is a nice kind of twist of how you think about it.
Yeah. I love this conversation because organically, I really tried to think about how to partition this. And now we're already, making new stuff up in the conversation, which is great. I love it.
Love it. All right. So we spend 10, 12 years doing, right? Being like the world's best contributor, and like the satisfaction, the check marks, the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes that we drive. All of this is very exciting. So what's phase 2?
All right. So phase 2, I like to call build. Build is tricky. It's really, really tricky. I mean, it's kind of not dissimilar from product management, right? In that you have requirements and now you got to build those requirements. The reason that build is tricky is this is where you really take all of your credentials, all of your experiential learning, all of your trajectory honing, and you start to use that as a foundation to catapult where you're going to be moving yourself into that next career advancement and whatever that career advancement looks like, right? I'm not labeling going into leadership or going into management. It's whatever that next career advancement looks like for you. But it is a strange thing in that all the skills that got you successfully through the do phase are not necessarily the same skills that are going to enable you to succeed in the build phase. And this is a very tricky pivot. And a lot of people actually can't make that focused pivot in their careers. And so I had a great colleague, and this was a term he coined. I don't know if it was his original term, but if he listens to this podcast, I'm calling this out, that I stole it from him. But I like to also refer to this phase as moving from being the warrior to the diplomat, because the work changes from you doing the work to you getting the work done through others. And so it is less about you rolling up your sleeves and demonstrating your subject matter expertise through your ability to actually perform that work. It's about demonstrating your skills to activate people to actualize that work on the organization's behalf. And this is a very tough pivot. And so if you're going to really kind of catapult your career during the build phase, you need to think about how am I going to make that adjustment in my mindset and my skill set to be able to pivot from being that warrior to being that diplomat.
I love that. That's a great visualization too of what we're talking about, the warrior to the diplomat. And I know you started by saying it wasn't really like whether you were going to be a manager or leader, but a lot of your description of doer does feel like I was an individual contributor and now I am a people manager. And so I have to activate the people underneath me. Is that the majority of what you're thinking? How would that translate to someone who is continuing to grow, but is not interested in the people management aspects of the world?
Yeah, and I reference that because it's sort of a natural career trajectory to go from doing the work to managing people who do the work. Even if you don't find yourself in a managerial leadership capacity, you will elevate to being a seasoned veteran subject matter expert. So you will move from being the person who does the work to being the person on the team that other people look to help develop and mentor the work that is done, because you will have had 10 to 12 years of experience at this point in time. And so because you have that experience, your peer group, even if you're not in a labeled managerial component or managerial position, people are going to look to you in a leadership way because you have the 10 to 12 years of experience that they don't possess. And so it's still about how you can help foster and activate work with others based on that knowledge base that you acquired in that first phase of your career.
Yeah, and I could see that. I think of that. A nice comparison here is when if someone becomes a kind of a solutions architect, right, on the development side. You're a solution architect doesn't necessarily mean that any of those developers report to you, but it is your vision to some degree that they're going to inspire. And I think on the product side, that often comes either through as you grow and get stronger, you get this sort of, maybe you get the flagship product, right? And other people are doing the features around, or you're on the platform for other pieces. So just in that sort of experience and seniority, you start to carry a bigger piece of that vision, whether or not those people directly report to you.
100%. You also see this, Rebecca. Some organizations will have, especially if they're a certain size, they will have technical product managers and they will have business product managers. And so you might see somebody transitioning from being that technical expert product manager that's really more focused on the feature functionality and the technical intricacies of the product to having that broader kind of general manager, business owner, product management role. Both are great. I'm not saying one is better or the other, or you should stay in one and move to the other. But the business manager, product manager is now going to be required to have a broader view across probably more areas of the business. So that would be another example.
Nice. All right. So we did for 10, 12 years. Then we build where we were as diplomats, right? We're not only still continuing to do ourselves, but probably the emphasis and the focus of our work is into help activating others, right?
Yep.
So what's this third phase?
So I call this catalyst. One, because I think it's a cool sounding word, catalyst. But if you think about the definition of a catalyst or to catalyze, it's really about how to create acceleration. And so in this last phase of your career, what you're doing is you're again shifting your focus. And you're shifting your focus from doing stuff to activating others to do stuff, to creating the people support structures, the systems, the processes that are really going to enable a rapid activation of the landscape around you. So it is about removing blockers. It's about having the things in place to drive acceleration. So that is really kind of the holy grail skill at this junction in your career is how do I take the stuff that I've learned, the stuff that I've learned how to activate through others, and how do I now take that and create an environment where we can have acceleration because we are operating with maximum efficiency. And I know how to build the people, the systems, and the processes to be able to accomplish that. So how do I catalyze that reaction chain to drive that acceleration?
I love that. So it is thinking more systems, more processes, zooming out from an individual project and thinking about the infrastructure and structure that makes both those things work. Is that a good translation?
Yeah, it's kind of thinking about the ecosystem in totality, right? And so thinking about, okay, now we're maybe doing things at a bigger scale, a grander scale, a larger impact scale, a larger influence scale. And so it's no longer just about getting A done. It's no longer about getting A done through people, but it's about creating an entire ecosystem that you have all of the componentry that's going to enable that entire ecosystem to move at an accelerated rate. And so, one of my absolute favorite paraphrased sayings is from Carl Sagan. And he said, this is a very shortened version of this. He said, reluctant mutators often perish. And, really life is about evolutionary improvements. And I think if you do evolutionary improvements correctly and you do them rapidly and you do them efficiently, that's where you get revolutionary improvements. And it's very hard to start with the revolutionary improvement if you don't have all of the other blocking and tackling done. And so I think that catalyzed phase of your career is really about creating an environment that enables that acceleration, permission to try, permission to fail type of environment. I think it's also an environment where you want to start thinking about, I'm gonna throw this whole conversation for a loop, and I'm gonna add a bonus phase. I'm not even going to call it phase 4. I'm just going to call it the bonus phase. Or maybe I should call it the double secret probation bonus phase. And you also want to start thinking about your out. And as part of that out in the catalyst phase, you want to think about how you're going to pass that baton to the generations that are coming behind you. So you're not just catalyzing the work. You're not just being a catalyst for the work. You're also being a catalyst to ensure that ecosystem that you've established is going to survive as an ongoing entity because you've prepared that next generation to be able to do that work as well. And I think that's a really critical component and responsibility that people should have when they get to that point in their career. It needs to also start being about the other people who are coming up behind you, because you are going to have that bonus phase.
I love that. And I also think it's important because like you can't skip to the catalyst stage. You can try, right? But it is what you've learned about along the way that makes you able to not just zoom out. You can zoom out without having done it, but zoom out and create things that are effective. We've probably all seen the unfortunate when someone comes in from out of nowhere and just tries to put in structure without any understanding of the role or the people. And that can be very disruptive, right? I mean, there's some great, yay, new eyes, you see new things.
That never happens. Does that ever happen?
Right?
People coming in, taking things over and not bothering to learn about it first.
Right? Huh. Like, oh, that's one way to fail. But I do think that you have this learning and this not only helps you, to your point, spread the impact of what you've learned within the organization and potentially even further. I also think it's interesting when you talk about your double secret probation secret one. See, I told you she's on nice. So it's coming the extra phase, bonus phase.
We're going to work on the branding for that phase, Rebecca.
Yeah. Well, yes, we'll come back with a trademark name. Don't you guys worry. But when we talk about the exit phase, and you and I talked a little bit about this, one of the things I found really interesting is like you do talk about it fourth, but you are a big proponent of that exit phase actually being part of each phase, right? That it is everything you do and build and catalyze that enables the exit that you envision.
That's right. So there will come a point in time that you are going to leave the workforce. And for everybody, it's at a different moment and different criteria, different circumstances, whatever, but it's going to happen. And I actually am a huge advocate that you should be planning and preparing for bonus phase 4. Again, we'll work on the branding. Your exit phase, you're out through all of your career, because that moment is inevitable for each and every one of us. So in parallel, as though we haven't given you enough to do already, in parallel, I would say, make sure that you're thinking about your out. What do you want to do when you exit your career? Where do you want to live potentially? What do you want to see? What do you want to do? What philanthropy is interesting to you? What community is interesting to you? And what are you doing to cultivate those interests along the way so that when you're faced with that moment, it's not a brand new thing you're thinking about. You've already formulated that opinion and you've done some of the blocking and tackling to prepare for it, i.e. save your money. And so I think it's really, really critical that the first day of phase 4 for you, you're not sitting around going, now what? Now what? Because you've thought about that too, and you're prepared for what the now what might look like. I'm not saying you have to have every detail ironed out, but have a point of view and prepare for that point of view to be actualized as well. There was something else too that you said, Rebecca, about being smart. I mean, maybe smarter is not the right word, but knowing stuff in phase 3 that you don't know in phase 1. When I was in phase 1, I went to this event once. And I'll never forget, this has stuck with me for 30 years. One of the speakers said they were talking to a predominantly mid-career audience, and I was definitively not mid-career at that point. And there was a sense of worry in the room of people thinking, am I relevant? And the one thing that speaker said was, yes. And the reason is this: you are a better decision maker in phase 3 than you are in phase 1. And that can only come from experience. And so don't underestimate the value of that superpower in phase 3, because it is a really distinct superpower that you have in phase 3 that you simply can't possibly possess in phase 1.
Also, don't beat yourself up too much for the failures in phase 1. Because that's why we're better decision makers in 2 and 3 is because we're like, oh, you know what you should do because you want to avoid, like, right? How many times are you doing a project and you're like, oh, you guys want to do this? And I'm like, oh, that's smart. And you're like, yeah, but it's because I messed this up before. It's not because I'm brilliant, right? It's like I have tripped in this pit pothole. And so now I would like for you to not do that. So, I mean, yes, don't.
I always tell my mom she's gotten remarkably smart as I've gotten older. It turns out she actually did know what she was talking about.
I distinctly remember being in my college dorm room, like my freshman year, and thinking, "Oh, damn it, they were right." Right? Because like, you go the high school years, they don't know anything. They've forgotten everything. Right. And then I was like, oh, shoot, this is coming at me. But awesome. Okay. So we talked a lot about a lot of different things, Kirsten. If you were going to have listeners do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would it be?
I would say, honestly, if you're not already doing it, save your money. When you are in phase 1, I don't care if it's $5, save your money. And here is why. 1, that's preparation for double secret probation bonus phase 4 out. And 2, there will be a point in time in your career where you either want to leave a position because it's not right for you, or you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of a layoff. It's going to happen. And you want to have the financial position to be fine with that, such that you have the luxury of choice when you make the next decision that you make. It's going to happen. And so just there's no better asset than time when it comes to saving your money. And if you do that starting at 25, if you need to pull that emergency cord at 40, then you can. And if you want to pull it as a parachute because you're now leaping to a different part of your life, you can. So I know people say this all the time, but it's really, really critical. And the second one, I had a second one and now it lost me because I'm so wonky about save your money, save your money. Well, I know it leads to the second one. And the second one is this. Don't neglect perpetual networking over the course of your career.
It's so easy to do.
It's so easy to do.
The neglecting, not the networking.
Right. Here's what I'm talking about. I don't want you to be schmaltzy. I don't want you to be gross. I want you to be authentic, but stay connected to your network because per the first tip, there will come a day where the likelihood that you might find yourself on the wrong end of a layoff will happen. That's just the corporate climate today. And if you're in that position, the first time your network hears from you is because you need help looking for a job. It may not always land the right way. If, however, you've been constantly connecting in conversations with your network, it's going to be very different when you open that door to be invited in. And it's simple. It's this. Set aside an hour a week and sit down and go through LinkedIn and look at your network. Also, because these are people who presumably you're interested in because you're connected to them. And find out what is going on. Did somebody get a promotion? Did somebody change careers? Did somebody do whatever? Did somebody make an exceedingly thoughtful post or share a nugget of goodness or wisdom or whatever? And lean into that. Comment, congratulations. That's really great. I like the point you made on this. Interact with your network because that's why you have it. That's why it's there. And again, the people you're connected to, presumably you're connected to them for some reason. And so I'm not talking about a contrived, inauthentic action. I'm talking about setting aside time to actually spend engaging with people you are presumably interested to engage with on some level. And so those would be really the 2 pieces of extra advice I would probably dole out.
Look at that. Bonus advice, bonus phases. It's all kind of gimmies here.
And you get a bonus. And you
get a bonus. This was, as always, an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for your insights. I think thinking about our careers and taking a moment to do that and realizing what phase we're in and what we should be focusing on is something we think of as a luxury, but is really a necessity to get not just to the bonus secret phase, but to get to the any next phase effectively. So thank you for your sage advice, my friend.
Well, hopefully it's useful to somebody. I will be in my camper van and harder to get a hold of if you have questions, but we could make that happen. So
excellent. All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.